Hello and welcome to Brockley News Extra, where you get another chance to hear some of our recent interviews about what's happening in and around the RNOH, including updates from charities and hospital staff. I'm Alan Joyce, and today we hear from two of the most influential and important people in the hospital, the chairman, Tony Goldstone, and the chief executive, Rob Hurd. For the first time, they come in together to talk to Radio Brockley about the hospital's new buildings and plans for the future. That's coming up over the next hour. This is London's longest running hospital radio station, the multi-award winning Radio Brockley. So let's hear the full interview now from the chairman and chief executive, who talk about the opening of the Stanmore Building, the next phase of the rebuild, the car parks and much, much more. So let's join our reporter, Keith Reeve.
Well, I'm delighted once again to be joined by Rob Hurd, Chief Executive of the Royal National Orthopaedic Hospital, and Professor Tony Goldstone CBE, who is the Chairman of the Royal National Orthopaedic Hospital. Gentlemen, good morning and thank you very much.
Good morning,
to
Keith.
You. Lovely to see you again. Now, Rob, it's over 4 years since we last formally, shall we say, interviewed you. You're always very good at giving us a few words at various hospital events. Tony, it's a couple of years since we spoke to you, although, again, you're very good, and thank you both for being so cooperative to us when we drop a microphone in front of you at the drop of a hat. But lovely to see you both together for the first time in our studio, so I'm honoured.
Thank you, Keith. Good to see Radio Brockley still going strong.
Thank you very much indeed. We're very pleased to still be here. Now, we've got lots of things that we've got question-wise from our staff, visitors and some of our other volunteers. So if you don't mind, I'll lead off with redevelopment first of all. Now, we recently opened the Stanmore Building, which is a massive step forward for patient accommodation here. And congratulations to you both and everybody else involved in getting it built. I know it was a difficult process. Now, in retrospect, what are your thoughts on the hurdles and hassles that the Trust had to go through to make the building a reality, especially around the approval side, constantly changing NHS targets, the funding design, etc.? How do you feel now it's achieved?
Well, it is indeed a great achievement for everyone who's been involved, and I'd like, as the chair, to personally congratulate every member of staff and every volunteer who's taken a part in this process. You want to discuss it more later, but it's widely perceived, having been open a few weeks, to be a successful building. Because of the politics, we're in the strange position whereby, in terms of the beds, we could only get half of it done on this occasion, and there will still be patients in the old part of the facility. Of course, everyone accepts that it took far too long. Even in terms of the public sector and the various number of times it debates and redebates the need for major investment, what's happened here has been overly long. Some of it relates to the process of approval itself. Some of it relates to arguments as to whether a building like this, a hospital like this, should be standing out in Stanmore away from a general hospital site and dealing particularly with one specialty in adults and children. To cut a long story short, the executive team and all the staff have shown over the last few years that, in fact, this is a very safe and efficient way of doing things for these specialist and complicated patients. One of the achievements that there is now is that there is no need anymore to repeatedly and constantly justify the existence of a hospital on this site, because everyone, even the politicians, is coming round to believe that this is the right way to do this particular kind of clinical work.
Thank goodness.
Yeah, I mean, far be it for me to draw the current parallel to the debates going on around Brexit in the House of Commons at the moment, but I think it's very easy over 35 years of consideration of the rebuilding of this hospital to come up with all the reasons why that you don't do it. it's very hard to get to the point where everybody agrees what the answer is to some of the dilemmas that the chairman has alluded to that were over that period. I think even now, and we will have some conversations later on about access to the site and car parking and the like. What the right answer was clinically, geographically for the range of services here. Once you start building it, once we've got this anchor in the ground, then that's pretty much setting us up for decades, 100 years ahead, and we've been here 100 years. So the step to say yes, it's Stanmore, yes, rebuild it there was a complicated process, but we got there, and that's a very major anchor for the future and changes the whole tone of where we see ourselves setting out for the future, because we've got over that step one, will we be here or won't we be here, and that's very important, as well as being a fantastic building.
Yeah, so basically it's always easy to criticise, but what we're saying, we focus on the positives, what's good about it, and that's obviously what is most important.
Indeed, we found over those years, as you would describe, the struggle is lots of people could give the reason not to do it, but to find the reason to have the courage to do it, and to have a positive agreement on something. At one point it was, I was feeling like, well, just put us out of our misery. If you're going to just decide something, whatever it is, we'll live with it. And we've ended up with this positive solution. But it'll continue to be a challenging journey ahead to finish the rest of it.
It's always difficult to criticise one's predecessors, and in many ways one shouldn't do it. But for many years before our time, Mr. Hurd and myself, those in charge were asking for very, very large sums of money at one go in short terms to do the whole job at once, and that was never going to happen. We are going to have to do this piecemeal, so this is the first major piece. What we're hoping is that the time frame to do that will not be repeated piece by piece as we go forward to do the rest of what we need to do. Most importantly, the second phase between the new building and the spire, which will rehouse the inpatient beds for the rest of the patients.
The new build, the Stanmore Building, is going to be funded from the sale of the west end of the site. Once that's gone, where do we get the money from for subsequent phases?
Yeah, so it's quite a complex picture, but just in summary, the first phases that are currently occurring, of which the new Stanmore Building is the first tangible sign of it. There's a total package of about £100 million worth of investment going into site between now and 2021. And that comprises all the work that's got to that new building, a new prosthetics and orthotics facility, because we've got to move that away from the Western Development Zone, which, as you say, we're selling to repay some of the financing sources. The movement for the UCL academic facilities out of the Western Development Zone into the Institute building. Our new staff accommodation. Again, there's currently staff accommodation on that site. Our new multi-storey car park. And those are what I describe as the first phases of site reconfiguration, which enable us to sell the land, the Western Development Zone, which is currently on the market and under discussion and with a prospect to be developed for housing. So that's a chunk. The chunk of it is the land sale, where the money comes from. A chunk of it is NHS borrowing, so we borrow from within the NHS and repay that over 25 years at reasonably low interest rates. A really helpful contribution from the RNOH charity, several £1 million have come in from the charity to help with the new building, and they sit on assets and enhance buildings and contribute to that. So it's land sale, loans and charitable funding. The next sets of development, we have further potential to consolidate into a proper hospital facility in the centre of the site and sell other bits of the site in the other end, the Eastern Development Zone. We're looking at options of partnership with industry, because in terms of our research and innovation, which we're coming on to, lots of our industry partners and suppliers are very interested in partnerships to collaborate on the new sort of technologies of the future and innovation and investing in us. And charitable sources, grants, further land sales, and further loans from within the NHS.
And basically, we've avoided the PFI trap.
Indeed. Well, if we're to believe what we read, the PFI is no longer in town. We started this process where PFI was the only game in town, and we did not go down that route. I think it would have been pretty difficult for us to be having long-term debt here and to keep the subsequent phases going forward in that position. So.
Yeah.
I don't think you'll see any more of those.
No, they've not done any favours to most organisations that seem to have taken them on. So Princess Eugenie House is still part of the plans?
Definitely, and that's one I didn't mention, sorry, just now. So this step down, the patient hotel facility is currently on the market to do a very exciting development in the area currently where Graham Hill House is, to replace the independent living centre on the site for spinal cord injury patients, to provide patient hotel accommodation for patients travelling from all over the country for rehabilitation programmes, and to effectively provide accommodation for all sorts of step-down facilities rehabilitation. So the veterans, we're a veterans accredited hospital and amongst a network of hospitals, and they can come and stay in this step-down facility. So that's getting, we're on the market at the moment doing the contractual discussions, and July is when we will have selected who's going to do it, and it will begin, and it'll be about an 18-month build programme from that point. So, I mean, there's a big year in 2021, which is when a lot of these things I've talked about earlier and Princess Eugenie House sort of come together and open. So the site will feel completely different, a lot more redeveloped, albeit we will still have elements of the slope still going.
The good old slope.
The step-down concept is very important. I suppose there's nothing terribly new about it, but if you take a patient stay in the hospital, they need their surgery and then to be looked after pretty intensively for a few days afterwards, and then for another period of time before they go home need to be looked after in a less intensive way, in a different kind of way, which will increase their mobility and their rehabilitation to go home. Like several of the other things we want to do, when we finish this, we want it to be a national exemplar of how you do this in orthopaedics, which would get translated to other units in specialist and general hospitals in orthopaedics around the country. And it's probably worth remarking at this point is we're looking at every different kind of individual element which will make this hospital special in the clinical services in which it specialises. So in terms of the musculoskeletal pathology, looking at samples under the microscope, there are fewer and fewer experts in this area in the UK who are able to do those interpretations, and we're going to try and get that centralised here. Eventually, when we get the new imaging facilities built, we will have expertise and a library of films from which you can learn by so-called artificial intelligence, and there's a national shortage of radiologists, the experts who interpret those things. We've got the best ones here. We want that to become a national reference facility. So the Princess Eugenie, although not a unique concept, hopefully will become the reference facility for how to do it in orthopaedics. There are one or two other areas as well, but I think the future of this hospital is to try and make some specialist areas the national centre and the designated national centre.
So it's Stanmore, basically, the RNOH at Stanmore, blazing a trail, leading the way, as it has done for decades, in clinical research, development.
That's the strategy. And
implementing it nationwide, so that the things that used to be specialist operations in general hospitals are now simple, relatively, procedures compared to how they used to be.
Some of the very complex, of course, will come here in the first place instead of people trying to do them in general hospitals, but how to do it, we want to be the reference centre for a lot of that.
Towards the end of 2018, there was a consultation on parking that took place for everybody, basically, staff, volunteers, patients and the general public. The site is very poorly served by public transport, and some people have few options how they can get here or away from here. So was the consultation useful, and what is the outcome of that?
Yeah, so I've been looking forward to this one, Keith, as you can imagine, and as I alluded to earlier, when the deliberations of the future location of the Royal National Orthopaedic Hospital and the passion people felt for developing on this site, always niggling in the back of my mind was how are people from across the country going to continue to get here and park here, particularly with the mobility issues that they face. So it wasn't the formal consultation. Everybody, I appreciate there's a certain amount of cynicism to consultations that don't actually contribute to things. This was actually in a pre-engagement phase. This was getting out, talking to as many people as possible, and there were several hundred people feel passionately about this, who told us their views in no uncertain terms.
So did I.
About the car parking situation. What did it tell us in that engagement phase, which informs what we will formally consult on later, when we have an actual car park and a plan for how we're going to deal with it and some of the options. So a formal consultation will follow in later on in the spring to summertime. But the engagement phase, to help us understand what people felt, was unanimously people agree we have to sort the car parking out on this site, and there's no question about that. There is an understanding that people don't want to pay for car parking, but there is an understanding that an organised car park costs money, and if a health service which has to spend its money on frontline care and is not funded to provide car parks, there have to be funding sources available for that. There is also a feeling that charging structure needs to pay due recognition of the fact that it's hard to recruit staff in an expensive part of the world, so we should not be punitively charging staff relative to get here, that patients will travel a long way and we'll have to have the disabled bays, and are we going to be charging for the blue badge holders and the other? So we've got a range of views on that, and not a general consensus. And what the scale of charging is important. What a reasonable level that you would expect to be paying for that sort of facility, as opposed to coming out of the pay packets of nurses and doctors that we need to employ in the NHS. I think there is an acceptance of the need for a reasonable approach to that. The big headache is, ensuring we've got enough spaces, because it's all very well debating how much you pay, but if you haven't got enough space, and we are a victim of our own success. When I arrived here, we were employing 800 people. We're doing half the amount of clinical work that we're doing, and we now have a family of 2,000 people on the site, and we're in the green belt, and the planners don't like us building car parking spaces in the green belt to attract more cars and congestion into the area. And so we have to work on public transport, we have to work on carpooling, we have to work on park and rides, we have to work on a whole set of range of things that mean those that do have to come here and park here to do their day job, or patients to see their experts, have a means of getting to the site and parking on the site or travelling in some other way.
Okay.
Keith,
yes, Tony.
I'm pleased to have the opportunity to address your listening audience on this topic, because there are certain things of which they need to be completely aware, and then they can wrestle like us with how to sort them out. The first thing is that the board and the executive are totally aware that a lot of people need to come here to park, patients in particular, and staff. Secondly, what your audience needs to be aware of, and they will be, the Department of Health and the government, if we have one, is not going to give us £12 million for this. So there's a little problem of re-provision and how you pay for it. All I would say to your audience is there are some very thinking people putting their minds to this, how it should be done, in what proportion, who should pay a bit more, who should pay a bit less, how you guarantee access for the patients who have no other way to get here, and the staff, without which the patient wouldn't be coming here for anything if we didn't have the staff in the first place. So we literally ask for understanding, because there's a lot of work going on to thinking how to do this reasonably, fairly, and in an acceptable way.
No, I fully understand that. I remember when I interviewed you last in February 17, Tony, that you mentioned basically the same thing there, and very much, obvious that people think that, because people say, why don't you just build a car park? But when you say, well, we'll spend £12 million of NHS money, which is taxpayer money effectively, they'll say, well, how many operations doctors, nurses could you do?
Well, they won't give it to us anyway.
Exactly. and so you're in a no-win situation. Yeah. So people, as you say, need to understand the background to that. It's not as easy as it would appear. So when are we likely to see a car park on site?
So at the moment, the plan is for July of 2020. It's going up behind the current car park opposite the Stanmore Building.
Yep.
So come, again, as I said earlier, similar to Princess Eugenie House, that sort of June, July, there'll be enabling work happening in Anger. Car park doesn't take that long to put up. But it's likely to be linked in with the prosthetics and orthotics new facility. It's a whole development in that campus down in the trees there behind the car park where that currently sits opposite the Stanmore Building.
So prosthetics and orthotics, which are currently based on the West End site, will be based there.
Yes.
Come next year, sort of thing.
Indeed. So ultimately, I mean, there's a complicated set of phasing, but ultimately about mid-2021 all of these things will be complete. But one of the first things that will on current timetable is the car park in the summer of 2020, prosthetics and orthotics more like towards the end of 2020, and then moving things around, and then we've got the staff accommodation as well, but we've got to be off and repay the loan in the middle of 2021.
Okay. Now, Rob, I think you recently met with the Deputy Mayor of London for Transport and others, improving step-free access for wheelchair users at Stanmore Station. It's currently very poor. It's a very long, convoluted ramp up a steep hill. Absolutely lethal in winter. I've nearly fallen base over apex on that a couple of times. So representations have been made on this in the past. Is there likely to be any movement of this? Because what we need there is a lift.
Yeah, it was great to have Heidi Alexander, the Deputy Mayor, a big fan of the hospital. She was widely aware of the good work that we do here, and the Getting It Right First Time programme, and a supporter of everything we've done. So it was good to have her to walk the walk or the difficult journey out of Stanmore Tube up the disabled access ramp and to prove that it's not really actually proper disabled access at all. We are in dialogue with Transport for London, and they have, we're told, a pot of money for developing step-free access at stations, and we're on the list. When we hear about that, it's always difficult because we haven't got any clarity of timescales, and they're always deliberating. But we have another meeting in April to see where we've got to with that. But I know Heidi saw it for herself, and she understands the challenge for us as a national centre, that if we are struggling with issues like the car parking we talk about, we need to improve the ability to get to the tube, get out of the tube, and get up the hill.
Yeah, absolutely fabulous. And finally, on kind of the redevelopment, at least for this phase of our interview with you, are we likely to see any of the old buildings demolished in the near future, or are they going to stay until they're all empty?
At the moment, the Western Development Zone that I've been talking about will obviously be likely to be developed from the middle of demolished from the middle of 2021 onwards, as likely a housing developer will be developing that area of the site. In the immediate term, we are occupying the old bits with all sorts of plans for what we're having to do in the old slope wards. And for example, our research team have moved into the old children's ward already. We're looking at refurbishing some of that and doing some implant storage in there. We've got some really exciting plans around the bottom of the slope to have a theatre ambulatory care day and sort of day unit and admission unit. So we'll develop the bottom part of the slope with that, and that's that'll be along the timescale of the next couple of years. A new imaging department, a temporary new imaging department on the slope as we build the new phase, which will be after 2021, an imaging department. But we're giving imaging a new facility in the interim on the slope. So I wouldn't describe it as demolishing. I'd describe it as refurbishing and or knocking down and putting temporary sort of developments there during the next few years before the big next stage, which we call phase 2B, which will be the next battle for the major building, which is a mirror image building of the current Stanmore Building, which will house a lot of those sorts of things like the diagnostic imaging, the histopathology that the chairman was alluding to earlier, the remaining beds.
This is Radio Brockley.
I'm with Professor Tony Goldstone, CBE, who's the chairman of the RNOH, and Rob Hurd, the chief executive of the RNOH. We're going to move on now to what we're all here for, looking after our patients and their care. So what feedback have you received from them about their care in the RNOH in the past year, and are there any areas that need improvement?
Well, I think in essence the feedback across the board from the patients about the care is very, very good. None of that is a surprise to the senior staff. There's in any hospital environment always an opportunity or space for a little bit more improvement, but really the vast majority of the feedback about the care is very good. In fact, one should say that it's very, very positive about the care itself. The couple of things the patients allude to quite frequently is of course access, which relates to the site itself, and another area which many NHS trusts could improve, which is communication with the patients in terms of appointments and moving things around and fixing things for them, and even when the right things have been done, making absolutely sure that the patients know. Now, we'd like a perfect response on all of it, but in the centre of it, the technical aspects of care, there's really nothing but support and praise from the patients. Now, if you're seeing 130,000 or so appointments in a year and 30,000 interventional procedures, including surgery, you're going to get, of course, things occasionally are not perfect, and we're aware of that, and we could do a bit better in responding quickly enough to patients in that regard when things don't go completely right. But the feedback is very positive.
Yeah, if I could just build on that, the evidence. I mean, people may have heard that there was some press last week actually about from the Nuffield and the King's Fund around public satisfaction in the National Health Service. And whilst overall public satisfaction in the health service was not really holding up and has declined, if you go under those numbers, the overall satisfaction in hospital care, inpatient and outpatient care, is at one of the all-time highs in the NHS's history. And it's the challenges around primary care, A&E, and those sorts of services that are suffering at the moment. But if you look at specialist trusts like the RNOH, they are always pretty high up on the public satisfaction, the patient satisfaction, the feedback we get from our staff and patients. And things like this year's staff survey reiterating we're right at the top of the pile on quality of care and our staff feeling and our patients feeling the quality of care they get when they're here, albeit some access issues and communication issues. We're very proud that's holding up.
And I mean, one of the things that must be a positive in all of this is the Stanmore Building. I mean, what kind of feedback have you had from patients in there? When I've been on the patients, visiting patients in there, they are loving the building. I mean, obviously they sooner not be in hospital, but it's such a quantum leap forward to what we had before, and a lot of them have likened it to a hotel. And I've certainly stayed in worse hotels than you could get accommodation over there.
Well, so we've had nothing but positive feedback, but maybe some of it is filtered from Mr. Hurd and myself, but I don't think so. Nothing but positive. I think the design is good. One doesn't say this very often, but the technical build by Balfour Beatty, we're very, very pleased with. It's got snagging like all new buildings have, but most people are pleased with that. The way it fits with the atrium and the way the wards sit to it, people like, and honestly, they like the artwork, the attractive wallpaper within the wards, and the interesting. It's called the tribe because it represents images of the staff, but
yes. So these are the things.
The thing hanging from the roof in the atrium is actually. I personally had some doubts about it, but it's thought to be, but I don't know. It's grown on me. It's an extraordinary success. The interesting thing about it, the most interesting thing about it, is the vast majority of objects suspended therefrom are 3D images of the staff. And that has produced an enormous amount of staff engagement. Who is it? Do I like myself? Do I like you? It's turned out to be a very positive thing. And the artists who did both the atrium and the wallpaper on the wards have got an enormous amount of positive publicity through Twitter, etc., etc. So it is thought to be a great success as a building.
I think the tribes, as you describe them, are such an abstract thing to have in a hospital. It's brilliant. And incidentally, are either of you one of those tribes? You are.
We both are.
We
You
both are.
Fabulous. I have to make.
You have to try and spot us.
Yeah.
We can't remember where we
No,
are
yeah,
individually, but we
There's
are.
a code somewhere. but
Is there? I'll have to
Yeah.
find that.
It's kept in a safe.
No, I mean the Stanmore Building's fabulous, and I was amazed when I went in there. As I, before we started the recording, I was talking to Tony, and when I first walked in the building, and I felt like I was walking out of the cartoon image that was portrayed of what it would look like into the reality. It was just amazing. I just can't describe that feeling.
This is a very special edition of Brockley News Extra, our interview with the hospital chairman, Professor Tony Goldstone, and Chief Executive Rob Hurd. Don't forget, Radio Brockley is with you 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, with a whole range of special programmes. And you can head to our YouTube channel to hear this interview in full and many other previous interviews as well. Let's rejoin the interview now with our reporter Keith Reeve.
I'm pleased to say I'm with Tony Goldstone, CBE, as the chairman of the RNOH, and Rob Hurd, chief executive of the RNOH, who've kindly given us their time today to talk about the hospital and everything that goes on in it. Now, we're going to move into the research and development field here. Now, I've always considered and I've always promoted that the research and development, and I know Tony's alluded to some of this, and as Rob has already this morning, it's the jewel in the crown of the RNOH. We make things happen nationally and internationally sometimes that maybe wouldn't otherwise be happening, or perhaps as far ahead as they might be. So what do you think is likely to be the big steps forward? What's going to be happening in the near future that you can perhaps put a Stanmore badge on?
Well, I think that we are involved in most of the areas which are going to be most important. Having said that, we need better facilities to do the research, and we're still struggling to achieve that. Professor Hart, the Professor of Orthopaedics, is working on the area of what goes wrong with the prosthetics, the artificial hips that get put into patients where some of them need them out some years later. What's gone wrong with the physics and the engineering and the positioning, and how can that be used to eventually produce a product where fewer patients need them out early? And that's going to be very, very relevant for two reasons. Of course, everyone is aware we have a significant number, ever increasing, of older people who are going to need these procedures. And it's also quite clear that the regulatory aspects and the kite marking of these products has not been as strong across the world, not just here, not just in the UK, as it needs to be. And there's going to need to be better standardisation. I think we're going to be in the middle of that.
That's good. So basically, Professor Hart's work is not just based around things that happen in this hospital. He's trawling in replacement parts from all over,
yes,
and diagnosing what's gone wrong.
What his outfit is called is the Centre for Implant Retrieval, which means people send him the things they've taken out from all over the place, and he works out what went wrong. We want to stick the word national on the front of that. It in many ways, it's already functioning as a national operation, but it will be important to give it the badge or the imprimatur of that, and I hope that will happen.
It's the largest retrieval centre outside of the States.
That's amazing. Yeah, that's something we should definitely shout about.
Yeah.
The other thing I mentioned to you previously, Keith, is the imaging. So we have a library of X-rays and scans of bones and joints, which going back years, which would be unrivaled as a sort of collection. Now, the modern technology is to assess those by computer, so that you can look at a million X-rays and you can tell the 100 which are tumours and from the others which aren't. And I think in the future we'll have the workforce and the skills to do that, and we want to build something in partnership with commerce and industry as a win-win for the development of new technologies in looking at bones and joints. We already talked about the histology or the interpretation of the biopsies from patients in these areas. I think Professor Flanagan is a world leader in this regard, and the genetic abnormalities that go with some of these congenital deformities. I think that's the kind of thing to develop. It's already, again, virtually a national centre, and to do more of that. The way you do step down in orthopaedics, I think, needs to become the reference centre here. And we need to further develop what's already been done over the years in bioengineering and rehab, where Rui Loureiro, who's taken over as the local head of site in bioengineering, is looking at new robotic techniques to help some of those immobilised patients literally get back on their feet. So those are the new areas, and I think we're beginning to get ourselves placed in all of them. I would indeed like a fancy big building with all of them in, but we haven't quite got there yet.
It's fabulous, and Get It Right First Time is another Stanmore initiative which is being now nationally, or has been nationally rolled out, I believe, with considerable success and acknowledgement from the care programme in the UK.
Yeah, I mean, we're very proud here at RNOH that there was some criticism in my early years that, you know, we were sitting here saying we need the new hospital built, please, and looking after ourselves, but actually getting it right first time has shown how the RNOH can contribute to the whole of the NHS and add value out of expertise. It's not saying we get it right every time at RNOH, but we were seeing the consequences of that through the patients that were referred here. And you have to commend Tim Briggs, Professor Tim Briggs. You know, he's out there. He's now the National Director for Clinical Improvement and Quality Improvement, and so we're on the national stage there, and that's important when we're as part of our national role to be doing that. So it's good for the RNOH to get out there more.
Yeah. Now 2018, University College London pulled out of a proposed development of a joint biomedical engineering hub here on site at the RNOH. What does this mean for the hospital? Because they've had a long-standing relationship here. Does it put that in jeopardy? How big a setback was that?
Well, it's certainly a significant setback or a delay. I would really pulled out means there's a finality to it, which I am hoping is not the case. One of the things we must be clear about is that there is still significant UCL or University College London activity on this site, and that encompasses all those things I was talking about in terms of research. Now, why did they pull out? I think there are two main reasons. One of them is clearly financial, because UCL is committed to a very major development in East London on the old Olympic Village site for research and student accommodation, and they had certainly literally run out of money in terms of this project here. But we must also look at ourselves and say that although we have some exciting elements of research, some of which I discussed with you, they should be a lot bigger, they should have a bigger impact, and they do need to be associated with an undergraduate and postgraduate teaching element, which is, frankly, not as good as it ought to be here as a world-ranked hospital. How has that happened? I think some of it relates to the enormous pressures on the clinical side, where the senior staff and everyone else have been doing 3 to 4% more activity every year for at least the last 10 years or so. So in the 8 years I've been here, and it's not specifically causal, so the total activity is up more than 50% with not many more senior staff. So people have got less time for research than they should have, but we have to be honest with ourselves. It's easy to be busy and correct to be busy in patient work, but we have not got totally enough people with enough inclination on the research side. We simply need to do a bit better.
Right.
There's been talk of maybe working with other universities, but I increasingly am of the view that one of the elements is to look at ourselves and show ourselves how we must do better. I would be optimistic that project will get restarted in the not too distant future.
That's good to know.
Yeah, I mean, I think we were alluding, the chairman was describing earlier some of the really good areas of research that we've got. I think what we're saying is we need to grow that into other areas and be really get onto a world stage of that to attract the investment of a big university into the sorts of facilities that would really take that to the next stage. So there is some good stuff, but it's not enough, and it's not embedded enough in terms of everything that we do here. And so those little pockets need to be expanded.
So we need to develop the culture a bit.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, staff, it's been reported that the RNOH still has a high level of bullying and harassment amongst its staff, despite being one of the top 100 places to work in healthcare. The Value campaign appears to have been set up in part to address some of those issues. How successful has that been?
So, I mean, this is something I am particularly proud of. We are making progress. I think an organisation which, I've been here 12 years, for 10 years, 11 as chief exec, that in its early part, as we've described, was battling for its future, was unclear about where it was going to be, where it was heading, did not pay enough attention to looking after staff well-being and the leadership, for understandable reasons, years ago, took its eye off the ball. In recent years, that's been changed and transformed. As you say, we're a top 100 employer. We actually look at the staff surveys, and the latest staff surveys, we're pretty much up there on most indicators in the top of the country. We're in the sort of, are we as the best in the country or not? We look at the Marsden and the Liverpool Heart and Chest hospitals as our peer group, but we're ahead of the general hospitals and all that sort of thing when it comes to these staff feeling they're working somewhere that cares for them, that they know what they're there for, they're contributing to the quality of care. So we still have pockets of staff reporting back that we haven't quite cracked it on how we support them through the culture that we have, as you allude to, but we're certainly doing all the right things, and the latest numbers are really meaning we're getting there, and we're continuing the journey. Culture is not changed overnight, but I'm particularly proud of the progress we are making on this, and we've had honest conversations as an organisation. And I'd say to people listening, it's not 100% fixed, but at least we're raising and talking about the issues, and we're addressing the issues when they arise. And I think it's been an important part of our growing up as an organisation. But it's rooted in the survival mode we were in, the battling for ourselves that we had, and as the chairman says, continuous pressure of workload, clinical workload, and that environment in the small family community of the Stanmore site and Fortress Stanmore did create a culture in which the family was falling out, and some of the individuals, and that the feeling of inequality and bullying and harassment bred in that environment. And the wider world has moved on in a lot of these respects as well.
Yes,
we're not immune from that here, and we're part of the London NHS, and some of the London NHS figures are not great on some of these figures, and not things we should be proud of. But I'm proud that we're making progress on it.
Great.
We should not hide from the fact that it was not good 10 years ago, and however, the improvement has been enormous. You see things reported from elsewhere in the papers now that would never today happen here. Things also went on here 10 or 15 years ago which today would be stopped in under 1 day. And this is not to emphasise the negative, something bad's happening and you stop it. The whole culture of the way different parts of the workforce behave to each other is enormously changed. And our workforce department, headed by Tom Nettle, has put in an enormous amount of work. If you actually look at the figures now across the NHS in general and the different subgroups, we are not an outlier for this kind of behaviour. We are well into the group where these things are much less of a problem. So I don't want him to come over here as the chairman complacent. He doesn't know what's going on. I do know exactly what's going on, and it's 80% better than it was 10 years ago.
That's good.
Can I give a very tangible example for listeners? So one of the underlying things is actually patients and service users being quite aggressive towards staff, and I think we have been complacent over the years. We haven't got an A&E department, and have we supported? So what can we do about it? You might say, well, in terms of what we have done about it and are doing about it, is more support to staff that we don't tolerate abuse of our staff from patients who are trying their best to care for them. And I think we maybe took our eye off the ball going back, that somehow because we were an elective orthopaedic centre that patients weren't going to be as abusive towards staff. But we do have that happening, and we've been raising our game on the support that staff will feel. So when that comes through in how staff feel to work here, in the old days they may have said, actually it doesn't. I don't feel that supported in dealing with the patients who are being abusive towards me, and we're turning that around.
That's good. Good to know. And now, the Stanmore Building is a big leap forward, as we've established, for patient care. Staff have moved into that. They're making it work. What kind of feedback have you had from them? Because it is so different, so radically different. It's a building on more than one floor, which is almost unique here, certainly for patient care.
Yes, so we have to show the staff this thing. That's a lift that works. Rob has much more to do with the staff on an everyday basis than I do, and maybe some of the things I hear are filtered, but I've heard nothing but positive things from the ward staff about it. Of course, you've got this enormous irony that we have in modernising healthcare, that as you give the patient the dignity of more chance to have a single room, it becomes more difficult for the staff to see how they are, because they have to keep going. I mean, it's obvious. They have to keep going in there. They can't just look down the ward. So some aspects are massively improved. I've heard nothing but good things from the staff.
Yeah, I think, trying to reflect honestly the journey we've been on, the change from the old to the new, and some of the new technologies and some of the things, what was a interesting period for staff. I think once we got through those opening few weeks, I would echo what the chairman has said. The feedback's unanimously positive. There's some great technology in there, the Vocera, where the nurses can all talk to them, the patients can get hold of the nurse, and everybody's using it. The whiteboards, the electronic boards, people are enjoying the technology, which is not something I often say. So the transition was difficult, and the early period was difficult, and by all means, nothing. Those early weeks, it wasn't perfect, but when we've come out of those, I think unanimously positive now is a fair summary.
Yeah, and of course the children's ward, which I'm actually almost wish sometimes I was a patient again for the first time in 1969, as I was in Coxon ward. They've got a little Tesla car to take them to operating theatre, and they got Pepper the robot, who I've engaged once or twice, and she's quite mesmerised. Well, I assume it's a she. I mean,
we have not defined Pepper's gender.
No, but it is quite mesmerising. So it's amazing.
This is Radio Brockley.
So still with me are Tony Goldstone, CBE, RNOH Chairman, and Rob Hurd, RNOH Chief Executive Officer. Now, public relations, gentlemen. The hospital has a long association with His Royal Highness, the Duke of Gloucester, with a ward named after him being recently carried over from the old building to the new. And His Royal Highness was the patron of the now defunct RNOH Friends of RNOH. However, as a public figure promoting the hospital, he seems to now have been dropped in favour of others. Is there a reason for that?
So you're leading me down the sticky path of royal politics here, Keith.
Sorry about that.
So we have always valued the Duke of Gloucester's contribution, particularly as patron of the Friends of the Hospital, which was a group that supported the hospital, but ultimately we folded a few years ago. And the work now is really focused through the RNOH charity, which has become a sort of a big charity independent hospital. So the general move in the charitable sector is smaller charities are difficult to maintain, and you know, the scale that you get from a big charity and all the governance that you need around charity, the responsibilities of the Charities Commission and all those types of things. And we've had alongside that fantastic growth in volunteers and contributions. So we've been on a growing up journey with how the charities have reconfigured and the volunteer workforce supports the hospital. As part of that, His Royal Highness Duke of Gloucester, obviously as patron of the Friends, and is no longer at the sort of forefront of our sort of royal branding, if you like. The Duke of York is our royal patron. Princess Eugenie has been fantastic in her support as patron of the charity. And there's only so many royals and you know, public relations and attention needs to have some focus. So I don't think it's right to say we've deliberately dropped the Duke of Gloucester. I think that would be an exaggeration. But the reality is we've focused around our royal patron, the Duke of York, the Princess, and the growth of the charity and the fundraising side to have a more to focus around that side of things. But we've always been we've as you say held on to the name of the Duke of Gloucester, given the history and transferred that over, that's where we've reached with that.
I think it would be useful here to just say a few words about the switch from the Friends of the RNOH, and indeed that concept which used to be around many of the NHS hospitals up and down the country, to the modernisation, if you like, of the structures for volunteering. Interestingly enough, what you see happening here with excellent leadership over the last 2 or 3 years is a much more structured approach to the kinds of areas which our quality volunteering individuals can lend their assistance to the hospital, without, as it were, being critical of the past, which you might call the tea trolley approach. There are probably 50 different ways in which an increasing number of volunteers are impacting upon this hospital. I'd like to take this opportunity to pay tribute to them and to invite even more, because I think they're joining us monthly at an astonishing rate in addition. The most obvious thing that anyone sees is the buggies which drive people around the site, but there are enormous number of other areas in the hospital in which they are making a contribution. One of the interesting things about it is people discussing the future of the health service in general are now talking on a national basis about the increasing importance of the volunteering structure. And I think, yet again, to be fair, the people who moved it up here in the last few years have been in the vanguard of all that, and I want to pay tribute to them. And of course, in relation to your audience, Keith, the people, when they've gone home successfully from what's been done for them at the RNOH, they should maybe think about the volunteering element too.
Yes, please do. If you're listening to this and you'd like to get involved with volunteering, just go to the Trust website. That's rnoh.nhs.uk and get involved. There's a volunteer section there, and you can apply online, see some of the roles, and also include yourself in that. And Radio Brockley is always looking for volunteers as well. So thank you for that. It's nice to know us volunteers.
Just to add to that, Keith, the volunteers at the RNOH, if you talk to them, some of the happiest people that I know, and you know, it shows the power of, you know, that they feel valued, they feel like they're doing good, and they enjoy it, and it's really good to see, and they're fantastic.
Good.
There was one the other week in the hospital, in Articulate, the magazines, quoted saying this is the best thing I've ever done, which is quite an, you know.
Yeah. Great.
There are various ways
and we didn't pay him anything to say it.
Well, I mean, I'm a volunteer here, as you know, and I also work part-time here, and I love being here. And it's part of me, and it's part of my family, really, part of my personal family. And it does mean a lot to me. And it's great when you get a smile on somebody's face or you get a positive outcome. And as you just alluded, the buggy service has been phenomenal, as well as other things, the trolley service, the mealtime buddies, all the support we give, the volunteers give to admin roles and that. It's really good to see. Now, the Buttercup Walk, which has been a fixture on the RNOH diary for several years, may or may not be taking place, certainly in its old form this year, because I believe it's not made a lot of money in the last few years. So where are we with that? Because don't we need something that brings in Joe Public to the site and raises the awareness of what we do?
Yeah, I think, I mean, it's going back to a similar sort of theme to what you're describing, the sort of modernisation of volunteering. We are growing up as an organisation. I think we're thinking about the modernisation of how we present ourselves to the world, the sorts of events we organise. I mean, as you may know, we have an open day for research. We do events which try and attract people who potentially might want to come and work here. The Buttercup Walk is very much focused around patients who've experienced the services and staff volunteering. So, and I think the modernising of an open day of the hospital, with holding on to some of the history. I mean, we're thinking about something about a Buttercup Day, bringing people from the community onto the site, thinking about is this also about how we're going to raise our profile in the local community, attract people to come and work here, donate money to us, volunteer here, as well as an opportunity for the patients who enjoy the Buttercup Walk as a sort of symbolic moment, which they find powerful. Because, these are big events to organise. We have to ensure that we return the money. We haven't got a bottomless pit, and it's making sure it re-energises it every year, rather than it sort of just wanes a bit. And it's felt that we want to re-energise that event and what sorts of things we can bring together to bring people to the site.
Gentlemen, thank you. I think we've come to the end of my questions. If there's anything else you would like to say to the audience, to the listener, it could be a patient, could be a member of staff, general public even, then here's your opportunity.
Thank you very much, and it's been a pleasure and a privilege to be with you, Keith, as ever. We are interested in more feedback about the new building. If there are aspects for the patients which don't work or don't come together, I don't mean technically switches, although they need to work, putting things, but how things go in their whole kind of what's called these days the journey, then tell us in a constructive way, and if it can be fixed with a bit more thought, that's exactly what we'll do.
Okay, thank you. Rob Hurd, Chief Executive of the RNOH, Professor Tony Goldstone, CBE, Chairman of the RNOH. Thank you both very much indeed, and please keep up the good work.
Thank you, Keith.
Thank you.
Good luck with the Radio Brockley.
A big thanks to the chairman and the chief executive of the hospital for speaking to us there. And if you missed any part of that and want to go back to listen to it, you can listen in full on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/Radio Brockley. For that and other previous editions of Brockley News and Brockley News Extra. Radio Brockley is on air 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, with a whole range of music to suit all tastes. You can check out all the details of our schedule on our website at radiobrockley.org. Stay tuned to Radio Brockley for a whole range of music and programmes to suit all tastes, as I say. From me, Alan Joyce, here on Brockley News. Goodbye.